Hello and welcome to our special coverage on the Russia-Ukraine file. 1 month after Russia launched its special military operation in Ukraine, the Russian army has failed to execute a swift takeover of its neighbor and install a pro-Kremlin government in the capital, Kiev. According to analysts, the Russian plan to surround key cities would rapidly relied on the assumption that Ukraine resistance would be easy. Nevertheless, the stalled operation raised many questions, few of which we will be discussing with our panel of guests. We have Dr. Farouk Kasibawi, political analyst, and Professor Maria Zolkina, political analyst and Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Thank you both for joining us. The discussion begins right after this break. And before we delve into discussion, let's start with the latest updates about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Russia says it is now focused on fully capturing Donbass in a apparent shift in strategy. Ukraine says 7,331 people were evacuated from cities on Friday. UN nuclear watchdog claims staff members at Chernobyl's radioactive waste facilities have not been rotated in 4 days. President Vladimir Putin accuses West of trying to cancel Russian culture. French President Emmanuel Macron to hold talks with Russia's Putin over Mariupol evacuation initiative. First, let me begin with you, Dr. Farouk Kasibawi. What are your comments regarding the latest developments on the ground? Where do you think this is going?
Thank you very much, and in fact, it's an honor to be on your program. Unfortunately, there isn't a big space for imagination here. We have a full-blown war on the ground, and economically, there is no way that we can see any kind of recovery in the next 2 to 3 years. The ports of Ukraine have been hit badly, if not for the lack of political stability, if not for the lack of structure and infrastructure. There is, in some cases, no ports or no supply chains that can be used from Ukraine over the next 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. This presents a serious issue for the countries that are currently dependent on Ukrainian wheat. The sanctions that are on Russia currently are here to stay, meaning that the political and the economical sanctions that have happened already are going to cause the world to enter into a state of no-go in any commercial dealing, at least over the next 2 to 3 years. This presents a serious catastrophical issue that could present itself in food supplies in Africa and in the Middle East. The situation does not allow us to have any kind of a bright outlook into the future, mainly because of the shakes that are currently being delivered to the US dollar. If Putin carries on with the decision to use the Russian ruble to sell supplies to Europe and to sell energy to Europe, which will result on the Chinese using the Chinese yuan, these are serious blows to the US dollar credibility over the world. What we need to be focused on as countries that are dependent in their food supplies and countries that depend on others in the supply chains, we need to be focused on agriculture, we need to be focused on manufacturing, we need to be focused on the research and development in the countries that are not going to be supplied with the wheat and the agricultural fertilizers that are used to be coming from Ukraine and from Russia. Our supplies of hard currency, our supplies of foreign currencies are going to be under threat, and it does not matter which economy you are talking about. It is all going to be shaken, and it is all going to be under threat because it is all US dollar dependent. These changes in the very near future of the supply of the economics of the world are going to cause serious shakes in the pockets of the normal people. As countries that are dependent on the current world model, we need to seriously be looking into ourselves to develop better options and different options. What is currently happening in Ukraine, whether Russia ends up installing a government that is pro-Kremlin or the NATO ends up installing a government that is pro-NATO or pro-Europe, is not ending soon. Both sides are determined to carry this war for a very long, at least into the foreseeable future. Therefore, I believe that we need to be thinking about ourselves as nations that are traditionally dependent on the supply of our food from others.
Very nice indeed. You mentioned, Dr. Farouk, that the war is going to carry on. It's going to linger on regarding NATO and Russia. And here I would like to hear the opinion of Maria Zolkina. Can't Ukraine just be neutral and move on with its life and the life of its people? Maria Zolkina?
Hello. No, Ukraine cannot be neutral. Ukraine cannot be a non-bloc status country because Ukraine was a non-bloc status country. Non-affiliation with any military blocs was included into Ukrainian legislation before 2014, but it didn't prevent Russia from annexing Crimea Peninsula in the very south of Ukraine, and it didn't prevent occupation of part of Donbas back in 2014. And actually now Ukraine is also out of any blocks of collective security. And this is one of the facts that which Western governments should understand about Ukraine. So neutrality or non-affiliation with any collective security alliances means no security, but actually more opportunity.
It seems that we are losing Maria here due to technical problem. We're going to get back to her. Dr. Farouk, as Maria Zolkina was mentioning, is that Ukraine refuses to be neutral, and you mentioned yourself that the war is going to linger on still between NATO and Russia because each side is trying to get Ukraine to their side, and apparently Ukraine is, and from the point of view of the Ukrainians, Zolkina said that Ukraine is not going to be neutral. What is your take on this? How do you see a way out of this?
Neutrality is an art, my friend. Neutrality is something that you are brought up with and you stand your ground with. Ukraine was never neutral. Ukraine was at some stage part of the USSR, and since the 90s, when Ukraine became an independent country, they were actively trying to pursue a membership in the European Union and in the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance, or the NATO. These actions were always perceived to be act of enemy against the Russian state. No matter what the end result of the next few days, the facts still remain. Ukraine has been under heavy artillery fire over the last few weeks. Ukraine has already been broken into two, with parts of Ukraine declaring independence, and we don't know if that's going to stop, because we might see more parts or more regions in Ukraine choosing to declare independence and, of course, becoming under the Russian umbrella. This will always be an issue, especially that it seems that the United States has elected to use soft power rather than a military confrontation in that area. this will inevitably result in a long, lingering war, as you can see.
Very nice
no
indeed.
matter which way it ends, we are going to be needing new supply chains. We are going to be needing new resources. We are going to be needing new suppliers and probably a new economical model, because the one that's currently standing is under threat.
Very nice. Apparently, Maria Zolkina joined us back. Maria Zolkina, you were making a point. Go ahead, please. We were speaking about Ukraine being neutral, and Dr. Farouk himself said that neutrality is an art. And Ukraine...
Yes, neutrality is not security of Ukraine, in fact, because it
Yes, carry on.
because Russia does Ukraine. Russia does want that Ukraine be not just out of NATO. Russia wants from Ukraine that Ukraine has no opportunities to defend itself, to have no serious army, to have no weapons. And it will directly lead only to occupation of regions of Ukraine. And that is why Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian experts do not speak about, Ukrainian some kind of non-block status, because this is the vacuum of security for Ukraine. Ukraine instead means some security guarantees, not like some, just declaration, concrete treaties where with concrete terms, how military support, including troops from our concrete allies, from perspective.
It's too bad that we're losing Maria Zolkina. Apparently, the internet over there is not really up to the quality. Yes, Maria, we were losing you.
We're losing.
Yes, go ahead.
We're losing connection because in a fighting in a country which is fighting, internet is not always good one.
Yes.
So, but what is important that neutrality might be very attractive, for some people in the West who want just to stop the hot.
Sorry, Doctor.
But for Ukraine. But for Ukraine, it will mean directly just Russians will fix their positions on the ground and will proceed in a couple of months further to other regions of Ukraine. Ukraine is not the country which is going to be, which is going to break into several states. This is the myths, and this is Russian propaganda, that Ukraine is so diverse inside that there should be several states instead.
So apparently it's going to be impossible. We're going to get back to you, Dr. Maria Zolkina. Now let me share with you this information. Ukraine's president made a video appearance at Qatar's Doha Forum earlier this morning on the energy-rich nation and others to boost their production to counter the loss of Russian energy supplies. Volodymyr Zelensky called on the United Nations and world powers to come to his aid, as he has in a series of other addresses given around the world since the start of the Russian military operation on February 24th. He compared Russia's destruction of the port city of Mariupol to the Syrian and Russian destruction wrought on the city of Aleppo in Syrian war.
When European countries refuse to purchase Russian oil and gas, it's a matter of time. Responsible states, in particular the state of Qatar, are reliable and solid supplies of energy resources and can contribute to the stabilization of the situation in Europe, can do a lot to restore justice.
I get back to you, Dr. Farouk. What are we expecting as outcome from this summit? Is Qatar and Gulf countries going to ease up the crisis in the energy market?
Can I just start from a point that President Zelensky has elected to choose Syria as an example. And that is a very, very unfortunate example, because the world did not come to help Syria, and nothing has changed in Syria over the last 11 years. Qatar might be promising the United States and Europe that they will be able to supply the shortage in the energy sector. However, this morning or this last night in Saudi Arabia, we see that the Houthi militias are actually bombing energy centers or energy and refinery stations in Jeddah. The Russians are not going to stand there and wait for Qatar to threaten their war, as Dr. Maria had explained. It is very important for us to see the conflict from both sides as a third party or as a truly neutral party in this conflict. We get to see the East and the West having a war. As the Middle East, it is very wise for us to stay away from this conflict and not to try and join any of these sides, mainly because we are not able to defend ourselves. That is the truth. Qatar is a very small country and is in range or can be in range of Iranian threat. Which is something that is now developing because the negotiations between the United States and Iran are all centered around Iran becoming a better supplier to the European markets with energy. This is all grasping in air, to be honest with you. Trying to depend on Qatar, trying to bring Venezuela and trying to bring Iran into the equation is really the start of a world economical war. And it is always the precursor to an actual world war. Right now, we as the world should be aiming to reduce the conflict in Ukraine and end it with a peaceful resolution. I imagine that there are a lot of people that are thinking the same way. In fact, President Zelensky himself has been asking for negotiations with President Putin, and we don't see any replies from the Russian side. This indicates that the Ukrainian side is not necessarily finding the support it needs from either the prospective allies to the West or at least the indications of the support it may need in the stability of the energy market from the Middle East partners. We see that there is a lot of careful tactics that are being carried by the countries of the or the Gulf states or the GCC countries. They are being extremely careful during this conflict, which is a wise move because the Americans or the United States is not necessarily acting too fast. Therefore, depending on a world solution or depending on an international solution, especially in an international scene that has just come after a pandemic of COVID that may or may not have ended, may not be a very wise decision. In fact, of course, we are not Ukrainians or Russians. Therefore, we speak about the subject from an unbiased point of view or from an analytical point of view, if you like. We would like to see a peaceful resolution one way or another to the conflict as soon as possible, mainly because the economical state and the financial state, the supply chains, the energy markets, the travel markets are all hit during the last 2-3 years. Therefore, to be honest with you, I don't see that Qatar is able to replenish or
nor
to save
other
the
Gulf
energy
countries
markets.
like Saudi Arabia or the Gulf countries in general.
Arabia has just reduced their supply of energy products to the market today as a result of hits into refineries in Jeddah. We are seeing that there is a larger or a more sophisticated weaponry that is being supplied to Yemen. Now, this, of course, could be coming from Iran, as the Saudi
Yeah,
side
so you're saying that this
claims.
is not a coincidence. The latest attacks by the Houthi rebels on Saudi Arabia targeting important energy plants actually is something that was plotted and perhaps is part of what's going on between Russia and Ukraine right now. Is that what you're saying?
Let's be clear. You do not go from a $300 drone to a multi-million-dollar missile just by accident. Somebody has started supplying the Houthis with weaponry, and somebody allowed for that to happen.
So
Yes,
apparently we're
Iran
being
has
dragged into
always-
what you're calling a third world war?
Well, a third world war is already happening. We're already in a third world war. It is an economical war. It is a sanctions war at the moment. It may be a war of words. It may be also a war of energy supplies and of allowing people to use your airspace and allowing people to use your borders. But this is going to develop very soon into a full-blown confrontation. That is why we keep calling for peace. We keep calling for everybody to calm down, because it looks like they are going to get engaged in a world war.
Very nice. Maria Zolkina has joined us via phone. I would like to hear her take on this. Zelensky's pleas to global community true resulted in some response via sanctions, as Dr. Farouk was saying, military and financial aid perhaps, but this doesn't seem effective, and clearly sanctions are not changing President Putin's mind regarding what he calls a special military operation. Dr. Maria Zolkina.
Actually, sanctions work, of course, because they have hit the Russian economy like none of other international sanctions have ever hit any other country, including Iran or North Korea. But sanctions is only part of is only one of a number of instruments which have to be used, in order to make Russia stop. Even the most important instrument is weapon supply, delivery of air defense system, anti-missile system, and fighter jets for Ukraine. First of all, to stop hostilities, to prevent hostilities, and to stop air attacks and missile attacks on Ukrainian civilians residing in Ukrainian cities. That's why Ukraine is demanding, first of all, even stronger sanctions, including cut off all Russian banks from SWIFT, not to allow Russian financial system, to adopt to new circumstances when some banks are still linked to international financial system. The second idea is to that Europe should refuse or make it to the possible minimum gas and oil supply from Russia. And the third idea is, of course, the weapons supply. And here, altogether, it will make the needed international pressure on Russian government on the one hand, and Ukrainian army, which is winning all the land operations and rebuffing pretty effectively Russian attacks from the air, even with our limited capacities of air defense system. Altogether, it will make influence. And my idea as an expert, which is working with conflict with Russia since 2014, is that to stop this discussion among Western and not only Western experts or politicians, how to make Ukraine compromise, how to make Ukraine grant some territories or, present some territories to Russia in order to stop the hot phase of the war. This is the wrong logic. Russia has invaded Ukraine. Russia has to take all the responsibility and to be responsible for these actions. And that is why the international community should work on the idea how to stop proceeding of Russians on our territory and how to make Russian troops withdraw from Ukrainian territory, but not about which territories should be given to Russia just in order to satisfy its geopolitical appetites in Ukraine.
Very clear indeed. But Maria Zolkina, as Dr. Farouk was saying, that these sanctions perhaps are not enough, and I mean the war is still going to linger on. And here there is a serious development. Energy plants in Saudi Arabia have been targeted by Houthi rebels, and Dr. Farouk here raised the points or concern that it's not something that just happened just like that. It was something planned and plotted for. Dr. Farouk, perhaps you would like to get back to Maria Zolkina on what she just mentioned, because she's saying that as a political analyst, she reckons that all these sanctions perhaps are enough to halt Moscow's aggression.
Sanctions and conferences and media appearances, videos are all words. At the moment, there are Russian troops on the ground on Ukraine. At the moment, Russian artillery is destroying Ukrainian streets. And to Maria, I would like to say my deepest condolences, and I'm very sorry that you're having to go through something like this. I'm very sorry that your country is having to go through something like this. I also look at the footage that is currently being supplied by different news agencies, and unfortunately, all I see is what used to be cities has now been turned into rubble. For this these cities, for these refugees to go back to their cities, for this economy to start working again, you need at least 3 to 5 years, if not more, if the Russian troops withdraw right now and if they stop shooting right now.
And speaking of withdrawing, Dr. Farouk, Moscow signaled it was scaling back its ambitions in Ukraine to focus on territory claimed by Russian-backed separatists as Ukrainian forces went on the offensive, recapturing towns on the outskirts of the capital, Kiev. Russian Ministry of Defense said on Friday as well that in general, the main tasks of the first stage of their special military operation have been completed. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said resistance from Ukrainian forces has dealt powerful blows to Russia. Let's have a listen.
Overall, the main objectives of the first phase of the operation have been completed. The combat capabilities of the Ukrainian forces have been significantly reduced, which will allow, I stress again, to concentrate the bulk of efforts on achieving the main objective, the liberation of the Donbass.
Maria Zolkina, can we assume, following your statements, that these sanctions started to kick in after Russia made this decision? And for Ukraine, would you define this as a victory, knowing that Ukrainian earlier they said that the complete expulsion of the Russian troops would be a victory, including from Crimea?
Actually, the real victory, the strategic victory for Ukraine was and still is to make Russian troops withdraw from all the territory of Ukraine. But at least it would be the tactical victory from all the territories as of February 23rd, 2022, before the invasion into other parts of Ukraine. Sanctions, of course, so current sanctions are not enough. I explained that we need more, like SWIFT, refuse from gas and oil supplies, and more freezing of financial assets of Russia, not to allow Russia operate or to serve its public debt on international financial markets. But at the same time, what we have to understand that Russian operation, which they claim to be successful at the first stage, so this kind of invasion, has already failed because it was supposed by Russian troops to be a blitzkrieg when during 2 or maximum 3 days they will capture all the Ukrainian cities, they will capture Kiev, they will occupy at least part of Ukraine. So it completely failed. Exactly because the resistance of Ukrainian armed forces was unexpectedly high not only for Russian government, but also, let's say honestly, for Western governments, which didn't do almost nothing during first 40 hours after invasion, because they simply, again, let's be honest, were waiting what will happen.
Yeah, Maria Zulkina, apparently we noticed earlier that Saudi Arabia and some Gulf countries have perhaps witnessed some pressure from the US, directly or indirectly, to keep on pumping their production through the OPEC Plus. But as we can see, and as Dr. Farouk mentioned earlier, it seems that these Gulf countries are being dragged into this war. And Dr. Farouk also made this point that perhaps these Gulf countries are not able to defend themselves. So how is the Western nations going to replace Russia's energy, since they are dependent? Europe is dependent on that. And regarding food as well, many Arab countries are dependent on wheat, for example, on Ukraine and Russia.
Actually, almost the whole wheat sector of international food market was dependent on Ukraine. And of course, it will be heated by the fact that Ukraine will not be able to supply, to grow and supply other countries with the wheat and some other foods, even if the hot phase will be stopped, for instance, in 1 hour, because a lot of territories, large territories, are mined as of now, and Ukraine will need like months and months in order to clean up and demine its territories. So Russia was not actually so important from this point of view, for at least for wheat sector of international food market. But regarding other countries, especially including Arabic ones, to be dragged into the conflict, so they are important as of now as the suppliers of natural gas and oil resources to Europe. And of course, there are negotiations between this part of the world and Europe, and especially US, in order to replace the gas and oil supply from Russia to Europe by supplies from other parts of the world. But what countries are really under the first risk of being, new objects of aggression, not necessarily direct one, hybrid aggression is also possible. These are countries in the east of the Europe, which are already part of EU and NATO. Look at what is going on in Poland. Look at
Speaking of Poland, Maria Zulkina, I would like to carry on Poland here and get back to you on that thought. President Joe Biden has paid a visit to U.S. troops stationed near Poland's border with Ukraine. He visited dine-in facilities made for the troops, where he shared some pizza. He also witnessed firsthand the humanitarian energies to the Ukrainian refugee fleeing the conflict in their homeland. Let's follow this report by Islam Said, and then we get back.
U.S. President Joe Biden landed in Rzeszów, Poland on Friday, nearly 80 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, to get a personal look at the international efforts to support millions of Ukrainian refugees fleeing conflict in their country, and speak to the American troops reinforcing NATO's eastern flank, for a highly anticipated two-day visit to the NATO member country that sees refugees fleeing the war. Joe Biden's Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin met with the U.S. troops deployed in Rzeszów, Poland, where he told members of the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division that they were in the heart of a fight between democracy and autocracy.
Ukrainian people have a lot of backbone. They have a lot of guts, and I'm sure you're observing it. And I don't mean just the military, which is we've been trained in since back when Russia moved into in the southeast Ukraine. So structures. And the question is, who's going to prevail? Are democracies going to prevail and the values we share, or autocracy is going to prevail? And that's really what's at stake. So what you're doing is consequential, really consequential.
Who have joined us.
He left the Polish city of Rzeszów to visit the capital, Warsaw, where he has been expected to meet with Polish leaders and visit a refugee reception center. Joe Biden has promised to help contain the migrant crisis along the Polish borders with Ukraine. However, he said he won't make the no-fly zone doable. It's worth noting that up to 3 million people have been displaced from Ukraine, and at least 2 million people have fled to Poland since the start of the month-old crisis.
I get back to you, Dr. Farouk. What can we get from this? What is the implication of Joe Biden's visit to Poland? Is Joe Biden saying to the world that we are ready for a third world war, knowing that Poland was among the countries, just like Ukraine, asking for a complete economic cut of Russia, to cut Russia economically and globally?
There is actually, if you allow me to comment, in that clip, during that visit, Joe Biden stood there in front of the 82nd Airborne and said to the soldiers, "You will see it when you go there." And actually said to the soldiers, when you go there, you will see women and children standing in front of tanks, which has led the American media to go crazy. Is Biden going to send troops into Ukraine? As you have clearly said, he is in Poland. He is 80 kilometers away from the borders. He's in it now. If for any reason American soldiers land in Ukraine and engage Russian soldiers for any reason under any cover, we are looking at now the world war has reached its armed conflict period. This is a serious problem. And I want to go back to what Maria said. Maria has agreed that Ukraine is at least going to be out of the markets over the next few months to couple of years, at least. This is being hoped for under the best circumstances scenario. During this period, we have 40 million people in Sudan. We have 30 million people on the borders between Sudan and the rest of the African Horn. We have about 100 million people in northern Africa between Egypt all the way to Morocco that are going to face serious famine and serious hunger. Our problem right now is not what is going to happen. Our problem right now is what has already happened. The damage that has been caused by the Russian troops, when the Russian generals say we have achieved our target and we have done what we have gone to do, they have crippled the Ukrainian military, according to them. We don't know. But indeed, what we can definitely see is they have destroyed farms, they have destroyed streets, they have destroyed ports, they have destroyed ways of communication. They have caused about 3 million people to leave their homes and leave their place of business. Ukraine is out of business, and the world needs to have an alternative plan. Because absolutely. Yes, as Maria said, as you have said, as we all know, Arab countries, African countries are dependent on Ukrainian wheat. We cannot continue to be dependent on Ukrainian wheat, not because we don't want to, or because we want to grow an alternative or a competitive market, because Ukraine is out of business and somebody needs to fill that gap.
Absolutely, absolutely. And filling the gap is not going to cut it for sure. We're not going to turn a blind eye to what's happening in the world. And there are a lot of crises happening in every corner of the world, not just in Ukraine. And underlining the global response to Russia's operation in Ukraine, the White House has said Biden's address will deliver remarks on the united efforts of the free world to support the people of Ukraine, hold Russia accountable for its brutal operation, and defend a future that is rooted in democratic principles. Speaking of Ukraine, of course. Maria Zulkina, what is your comment on this? And how can we avoid an all-out war since Biden is in Poland right now and apparently he's sending indirect messages or encrypted messages to his rival, that is Vladimir Putin. And apparently Poland and Ukraine is going to be involved in what is a proxy war, if the term is correct.
If you will compare official estimation of the situation or official assessment of the risk coming from Russia to the Poland itself, the position of the Poland itself on the one hand and position of the US will be directly opposite. Because I have been living in Poland for certain period of time. And Polish people at this very moment, for instance, they have, like any other, maybe besides of Baltic states nations, understand that the risk is really real. And what is even much more important is that while Western countries, including, by the way, US, which is, of course, giving a lot of support to Ukraine right now, but still we have some problems with air defense or, for instance, fighter jet supplies, which are not supported by the US government. But in comparison to US, to Germany, to France, to Italy, countries in the very east of Europe, Baltic states, Czech Republic, Slovenia, Slovakia, Slovak Republic, and of course Poland, they think that the probability that they will be defended by fifth provision of Washington Treaty, according to which all the NATO should react, to aggression against one of the members. This is under the question right now in Poland. So people really think that the response of NATO as of now here to start a larger conflict with Russia is so high that it prevents NATO from doing enough in terms of collective response. They are afraid in NATO to support Ukraine with certain types of weapons because they think that it can be interpreted by Russia as too much support to Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Maria Zolkina. Your point is clear, and we're going to have further discussion in our other editions, but we're running out of time. Thank you so much, dear guests, for accepting our invitation and being in our talk show from All 24 News here in Algiers. That's it for me and the rest of the team. Thank you for watching and keeping it here. Bye for now.